Hola, hola a todas, hola a todos. Bienvenidos a una nueva edición de VORonLive. Como ya saben, VOR es una serie de diálogos e intervenciones para evaluar problemas y resolver temas basados en la creatividad. En este sentido, viene de la idea de que un VOR es un mecanismo de la navegación aérea que ayuda al piloto emitiendo señales para mantenerlo en la ruta correcta. Entonces, en ese sentido, en nuestras series de VOR tratamos de explorar nuevas rutas a través de la creatividad. Hoy tenemos un espacio muy padre, muy interesante, planeado para ustedes con dos personas que pues son, por sus diferentes maneras, muy cercanas y muy importantes para Centro. Voy a pasarme a inglés, el idioma en el que será la plática, pero bueno, les pido que por favor nos ayuden mandando sus preguntas y sus comentarios a la sección de comentarios. Y ahora pues les presento a quienes vamos a tener el día de hoy. Firstly, I want to welcome any English speakers in case there are, and welcome you to another edition of VOR. Today we're going to talk about accessories, about luxury, about fashion, about many interesting things with two very important people to me, of course, but also to Centro. Firstly, we have Mónica Mendoza. She is the head, the chair of textile and fashion department in Centro. So she's in charge of all the programs. And we also have with us Frank Zambrelli. He is a very important person too. He has been at Centro for a workshop and a conference, but now he joins us here in VORonLive. He is an expert in accessories, in fashion, and branding and merchandising. And I'm sure Monica will introduce him more broadly now. So welcome, Monica. I'm sure Frank will be here at any moment now. So hi, Frank. How are you?
I'm very well, Gonzalo. How are you?
So yeah, and we're also gonna have I'm gonna let you guys have it, but we have a Mexico City, Puebla, Pennsylvania. So that's also very nice that at least now during our distancing, we can still have these spaces to talk and have creative conversations. Thank you both for being here. The space is yours, and I'm sure it's going to be an amazing talk.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo.
Thank you. Hello, Monica.
Hello, Frank. So, hola everyone who's already here. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us this evening. Obviously, Frank for his tremendous generosity. He has been at Centro before, as Gonzalo mentioned. I can't even remember now if this was last year or the one before, but he was with us with our footwear and leather goods design graduate students. We were also at his studio in New York with one of our undergrad fashion design cohorts, and now here and hopefully very soon back at Centro campus. I also want to thank Natalie, our footwear and leather goods program manager, and Natalia, our general manager, as well as to all of Centro's communication team. And then adding to Gonzalo's intro, I want to officially introduce you, Frank, because obviously you have great experience and expertise in this field. Frank has worked with brands such as Chanel, Cole Haan, Coach, Reebok. He's the co-founder and director of Atelier and Design Quadrant. He has also collaborated with prestigious institutions such as the FIT, Glasgow Caledonian, New York College, and currently in Fordham University. Additionally, he's the chairman of the Accessories Council in New York and a sustainability advisor for Accenture. And just a quick note for the audience, this is definitely a conversation, but that also includes you. We have actually very few slides so that we have enough time to hear your questions, your inquiries. So please ask your questions in the comment boxes in all different social media platforms, and we'll make sure to answer as many as possible. So first things first, why don't we start by asking Frank about his endeavors at Atelier Quadrant, and all of the rest of the places that you collaborate with, just to put our audience a little bit in context about your profile.
Thank you, Monica. It's a real pleasure to be back at Centro, even in this virtual format. So, my life has been in many ways, not the usual journey. I've been in the fashion industry for more than 2 decades, 24 years at this point, almost always in accessories, and much of that in luxury. And so where I stand now is in a place where the world has changed for all of us so significantly. But my role is varied, and I think in a way meeting the times. We're getting to a point in culture where people do what they're good at in all the places they want to do it at. So I have sort of 4 to 5 different roles that I enjoy greatly. As you mentioned, One Atelier really was born with the idea that consumers should be able to personalize their luxury, should be able to have a part in the process. This is about innovative materials today, a part in the innovation. And so that's really been a joy of mine, helping luxury clients build their own product. And so we do that in the virtual space online, but then of course in a real factory, the first luxury handbag factory to be built in New York City in 50 years, which has been a pleasure. I'm the chairman of the Accessories Council, really, which is sort of the industry's uniforming body to help promote the industry, really to help promote accessories in its way, sort of like the CFDA is to fashion, the Accessories Council is to the accessories industry. And we work all over the world really to promote every part of accessories, from education like you're offering at CENTRO, straight to working directly with the brands. At Fordham University right now, lots of innovation happening. This is a group called the Responsible Business Coalition that started really more on the sustainability side, but we're doing lots of things relative to how do we make our industry, our business, behave more responsibly. And some of that includes getting innovative around the materials that we use to create a more responsible business for the people that are in it, for the customers that shop in it. But that's a group of 46 CEOs from all the brands that you know, from Kering to Ralph Lauren to Theory, et cetera, all the retailers. And they meet twice a year. And you'd think that these people all knew each other, these very powerful men and women running these companies. But the truth is they don't get a lot of time to spend together. And so we bring them together to go over issues. How do we create innovation? How do we operate with lower impact? How do we operate in ways that are more socially innovative for the people in the industry to be more responsible as a business? And then we work throughout the year with liaisons that each of them have assigned. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see these very high-powered people, pardon me, who are really interested in doing better and working collectively to create that change. So, and then more recently with Accenture, we're forming a practice to push that out. I work a lot in education and I work a lot in the private sector, but you need to work big to create scale on an international level. And Accenture is 500,000 people strong. It's one of the largest companies in the world, and they work with many, many brands in over 140 countries. And so we're bringing this level of innovation in design, in materials, in sustainability, to become subject matter expertise all over the world, so everyone can know how to do this.
Yeah, and I would actually strongly suggest that our audience, if you're not familiar with Accenture, I highly recommend that you look at their work, because you might know a lot of companies within their group and a lot of people probably working over there. But I really invite you to go to their site. And maybe this brief introduction leads us to our very first and basic question for this conversation, which is, why is there the need and the interest for innovative new materials and replacements? And I think we could go also to the presentation now, right?
Sure. I think that the need really came from many, many different forces. The first being this idea that so many of our raw materials today in this post-industrialized world came from a simpler time. And so many of them come from the earth. We grow them, we extract them, we raise them as cattle for leather, we grow cotton for materials, all of these things. but I'm not sure that whenever the Earth was created, that anyone ever intended for there to be 9 billion people living on it.
Agreed.
And we're at a point where in all of our advancement, we're exceeding the planetary boundaries. So it's just a fact, unfortunately, that if we're not careful, we'll run out of a lot of these materials, and we are running out of them. And at the same time, of course, as you know from your sustainability conversations, we're really testing the limits of the planet. So we have to find other ways, not to necessarily take the place of everything, but to add to create an additionality. How do we put more colors in the crayon box, and not just always pull from the same ones until we wear them down to nubs? So part of that is just the physical limitations of the planet, and then part of it is a question of a consumer base that expects more. Right? We're all terrifically spoiled in this world. Even those among us that have less, there's still some basic level of provision which also didn't exist, and so we expect to have what we want. And so if we decide that we are no longer going to consume meat, or we're going to become vegan, and we choose to not buy leather products, doesn't mean we don't want a cool backpack or a really nice pair of shoes. We just need them from another material. And so consumerism is fueling this as well. But I think what's advancing it most, and why we're at one of the best stages we've been at really in the history of innovative materials, is technology. There's just so much we know, and so much we know how to do, and know how to do it at scale for a price value that makes sense. So we were inventing leather alternatives 100 years ago, but they were you weren't able to scale them, and they were too expensive to be realistic replacements. And so here we are now in this new place where we're able to do it, where there's the demand for it, and the scale is at a potential. So here we are.
Do you have, Frank, the feeling, because of the involvement you have with the industry, do you have the feeling that brands are becoming more open to this conversation and more interested in ways to figuring out how to reinvent, in a way, these systems, and how to bring these materials to the retail spaces, to their consumers, to their clients? Do you have that feeling, or there's the notion, maybe for you, that there's definitely a lot more that should be done in this area?
Yeah. So what I'll tell you, my answer to that is yes. In that there is still a tremendous resistance for lots of reasons. Companies became very big and very successful doing what they do, right, with very little incentive to change. And so there's not this market pressure, or there hadn't been, I should say, this market pressure to do it any differently. At the same time, they do recognize the boundaries. A lot of these companies are very immersed in sustainability and the environmental and social implications. They know that their customers are starting to pressure them. They know that the investment base, because it all comes down to money, right? The investors are looking for them to manage their resources differently, to be aware of the impacts that they're creating. Nobody wants to be surprised, especially in a public company that is issuing stock. Surprise is bad. So they want to understand that you're managing these resources and that you're making other plans. And so those combining market forces of consumers and investors are creating a little bit of pressure on the companies to at least invest, to look at things, to create some trials. And at the same time, the alternatives are, as we said earlier, advancing to a place where it becomes more reasonable to try, more viable to use these products as, again, as additional, not necessarily as replacement products.
Great. So maybe we start by having a look at some of these materials so that we can bring people concrete examples and concrete practices that we can see out there now in terms of materials, science, technology, and whatnot.
Absolutely. This first one is one that I'm most excited about. It's fungi. Those mushrooms in your salad, They're good for more than your salad. And this is really mycelium. Technically, not the mushroom itself. Think of the mushroom as the fruit that comes above the ground. The mycelium is the entire network of fungi really underneath the ground. That sort of fibrous structure that frankly holds the whole top layer of the earth together. The mycelium really is the glue of planet Earth. It just sort of expresses itself above the ground as the mushroom. But this mycelium structure really is remarkable because, of course, it's all natural. You grow it in mulch and air with a little bit of water. You grow it in a few short weeks, and it is, compare that against what it takes to raise cattle from birth, the years that it takes, the investment, the food, the water, the carbon, et cetera, all of those elements, and you have this very viable replacement. What's exciting from a creative standpoint about mycelium is that it's really getting good. The first elements of quote unquote mushroom leather, they were pretty awful. It was exciting, but you weren't going to use it for much. I mean, Louis Vuitton and Gucci had nothing to worry about in terms of, some upstart mushroom leather company taking over their business. But we're getting to a point where it's really getting good. We're figuring out ways of creating changes in the texture, the same way you have a different collagen structure in certain skins, a lamb skin versus a cowhide. We're starting to develop different ways of growing mycelium and treating mycelium to create some of those differences, to create some of those textures. And I would say the thing about this material, because it literally is grown, is we don't know what we don't know yet. It's already getting good, but the same way botany and horticulture has created all sorts of versions of the green bean or corn, I suspect that the same thing's going to happen here over time. We're going to be able to grow the same way we cultivate different types of wines and different varietals. We're going to be able to do the same here with mycelium. And there's already, yeah, please.
Sorry, and I think because there's also an interest from other areas within the industry or in other industries at using materials like this. I mean, I've seen several samples in the past of packaging materials and other things that are also being developed based on the same principle.
Yes, I think from 2022, your new iPhone might get shipped in some fibrous packaging that's actually molded out of mycelium. And so we're going to see it soon in stuffing and furniture and all sorts of options. I think we're going to see it used even in temporary housing. Sadly, as we face a world where emergency services is going to have to help citizens more and more, you can grow a house, right? You can grow a structure that keeps people safe and warm for a temporary period. So again, all sorts of options here. And in the fashion space, in the accessory space, of course, already one of the companies, and there are two principal companies, although there are more, there are two that are leading in the mycelium space. Milo already has partnerships with Adidas, Lululemon, Stella McCartney, and earlier partnerships with Kering. And in fact, they formed a bit of a consortium. So this coming year, 2021, you're actually going to start to see commercialized, consumer-ready products at a retail level made of mycelium. So get ready, it's coming.
And tell me something, in terms of, because obviously, besides our personal tastes and likes and appreciations, there's also a reason that materials have been used in certain ways in the history of fashion or accessories. And I think one of those is the qualities and the way that you can manipulate the material. How is, in your experience or from the products you've seen, mycelium behaving in comparison to leather?
I give it a B in a grade. I give it a B because there's many things that you can do with it that really, in a way, duplicate leather. Where mycelium hasn't arrived at yet is in some of the drapiness that you might get in, say, a lambskin or a nappa. So I think we're far away from seeing it in certain types of products. So we might see it in a structured handbag. We might see it in a suitcase. We might see it in upholstery, for leather replacement upholstery. I'm not going to see it in a drapey hobo bag anytime soon. I'm not going to see it in a flowing leather garment.
In a Rick Owens jacket or something like that.
Rick is desperate to use mycelium. I know personally that he's tried it, but he can only use it in very structured places, and he doesn't love structure, as you know. So that's a hard thing. So yeah, so that's where we're stuck a little bit now. It's not as papery as it once was. It's really evolving, but we have a little bit of a place to go for drape.
Yeah, maybe it's a matter of a few years that this will start becoming a lot more common, and industry will also get a lot better at the quality, at the, well, I would say different qualities that could be sold at different price points for different brand profiles, and
exactly,
it will be exciting to see, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so please continue, and I'll start checking at the audience questions.
Oh, perfect. So this next one is relatively new. It's just a couple of years in development. It's exciting for so many reasons, not the least of which, of course, hecho en Mexico. It's local, right? Made from nopal, which is the prickly pear cactus, and this really has, I think, a very important opportunity because there's a few things here that are different. One, you can create lots of employment, I think, in this particular case, because cactus is easy to grow. It grows in terrible soil conditions. All right. People are used to growing it from the mezcal and tequila industry and from the aloe industry. So this is a potentially commodity crop that can be used in land that maybe is no longer providing an income for many people that were growing other things. It grows with very minimal water, so it's quite an efficient. Cactus is obviously quite efficient in that particular way, but because it's made from the fibers of this very, very sort of durable plant, it in of itself, as this leather conversion, is also very durable. Very strong abrasion resistance, very strong tear resistance. It has a tensile strength and a durability that's much more equivalent to some of the stronger leathers out there. So a very strong replacement to animal leather and some other synthetic materials that weren't terrifically environmentally friendly. And so that part of it's really exciting. It's very breathable as well. So I think we're going to see this in footwear and other areas, but it's still produced more like a textile. And so you can really control it. One of the things I love about this is it ends up, in a panel, whether on a bolt or just in a panel, and that you're going to get your 1.4 meters, and you're going to cut your 1.4 meters. It's not like a leather skin where I might have, anyway, if I'm lucky, really lucky, an 80% consumption. In most cases, on a better skin, I might have only 60 or 65% consumption. The rest is waste. I have to figure out what to do with that. So now I can have the opportunity of a leather replacement that cuts like a textile. And that is really thrilling to the people who control the money in this world when you have zero waste.
I agree. And also, maybe, Jesus, if we can go back a little bit to the previous one, because we also have a few questions in regard of this cactus material. I recently had the chance to receive a full catalog of the certain materials.
Yes.
And I have to say, because of course this conversation has been out there for quite some time now, but you get a picture in your head, and then sometimes when you have the material in your hand, sometimes you're overwhelmed with it, sometimes underwhelmed. And I do have to say I was quite surprised to see the range in the product line, because some of, as we were mentioning in the previous example, I mean, they have some rigid, quite thick materials, but they also have other options that are super I mean, I wouldn't say super drapey, but quite drapey and very friendly with garment manufacturing. And I was very positively impressed with the range of products. And also, I might use this opportunity to ask one question from Facebook from Alejandro, who is asking if you believe indigenous communities could benefit with a material like this.
I really do. Imagine all the different opportunities to benefit from it. One, as a potential crop, right? So there's just the income production, especially if you don't have great land. You're not trying to grow corn or soybeans or something that requires rich, fertile soil. So there's tremendous opportunity. Also, it takes 1/5 of the water. Can you still see me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I lost you for some reason. Oh, there you are. 1/5 of the water versus typical organic crops. So again, if you're in an area where there's water deprivation, or if you're in a particularly low water table, not an issue as well. So it's a tremendous opportunity to low cost create this raw material. It doesn't require a particularly advanced skill set in agriculture. And now, of course, you can be producing materials locally as well with some investment and create this additional industry. So you have the agricultural opportunity, and then you have the opportunity of producing the product as well. So I think it's economically a real opportunity, not just an innovative opportunity.
That's right. And also, before we move to the next slide, I'll ask again another question from Nad Rodriguez in Facebook. So she's asking not specifically about this material, but in general, what strategies do you propose in order to change the industry without falling back to the same problems?
To change the industry, I think the only way to change the industry is to demonstrate viability, to sort of demonstrate that these products can be used in either ways that effectively replace them, existing products, or to create something brand new. And that's the other thing that changes. When you invent something that the market never knew it needed. And so I'm always encouraging the people that are working in the innovative space, as much as you're working hard to demonstrate replacement opportunity, work hard to invent something that we didn't know we needed. I always love the saying, if you had asked consumers in 1915 what they needed for transportation, they would have said a faster horse. And so really that's the opportunity. Yes, try and replace leather, but what else could we be doing with these materials that I didn't know I needed? Because then you're going to create an industry out of this material rather than just try to replace something that everyone's very comfortable with.
Yeah, and then we'll start also understanding things in a different way. Yes. Just, I mean, I don't know how to put it, but this is not only about getting less bad options about certain things, but maybe to come up with the absolute best in terms of innovation, and not only replacements, but alternatives to what could be done in an industry like this. And I also, I mean, I don't know if you have this feeling, but I also think sometimes that companies, let's say like this one, let's use Deserto as an example. Sometimes they would need a boost from external agencies, because I tend to believe that demand sometimes is way over the scale of what a small or startup company could provide. Because if you talk about supply chain, let's say, or you talk about the relationships with vendors, I mean, so many brands have these relations for decades.
Yes.
And they have established systems, and they have a capacity, they have an infrastructure that will allow for those companies to supply those materials to the brands, let's say.
Yep.
And very often with people who are working more in the innovation area of materials are experimenting in a way, and they need some time to figure things out, and they need some time to build an infrastructure that will allow for them to be vendors for different companies. So I think there's also that to put in the equation, or I don't know if you have a different opinion in this regard.
No, I think that's right. I think some of the challenge to that is that the industry it's a bit ironic, right? It's this industry, fashion is this industry that's all about change. We invent new collections 6 times a year. We can change out a store every 6 weeks. We're all about new, next, new. But our system is archaic. It hasn't changed in 75 years. I work with some very famous French and Italian brands. They have the same vendor base they've had since I was a baby. And they are very, very closed to change. So as an industry, I think we have to do a better job being open to this. I think that's part of what I appreciate about these changing market forces. At the end of the day, if you are a brand, if you are selling something, your investors and your consumers are your overlords. That's it. You are beholden to them. And we're finally in a place where, and I think the pandemic, for all of its tragedy, there's some silver linings. I think the world shifted on its axis. Consumers have a different perspective, more existential perspective. The sales of healthier foods are through the roof, right? The appreciation of more sustainable options is through the roof. Investors are looking, again, much more scrutinizing companies to be managing resources differently. And so I think with those market forces, maybe this moment has finally opened up where smaller companies with innovations like these will be highlighted and appreciated in ways that they weren't before. Let's hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so I have more questions, but maybe we move to the next material, and then I start having a look at the inquiries, and then I'll ask you when we have a few seconds to talk about them.
Perfect. So the next material I love is also fibrous. It comes from the pineapple. And maybe some of you know the story of Dr. Carmen Hinojosa. She's an incredible woman who had gone to the Philippines to actually help them with the leather industry and realized there were all sorts of challenges. So much of it was imported, and basically came up with the idea, what is here? What could we do locally here to support the people and build an industry? And in fact, of course, the pineapple was a staple crop. And through lots of trial and error, realized that the plant leaves were, the leaves of the pineapple plant were suitable, and they were really just part of the process. They had sort of laying around the country, collected in bundles, all these long fibers, extracted it by these sort of semi-automatic machines. And she realized that they could be converted. And so created a process, a really incredible process, where they're dried, sometimes in the sun if the weather is good, sometimes in ovens, into this fluff-like material. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, Monica.
Yeah.
Yeah. So into this fluff-like material that then undergoes a bit of a mechanical process, almost like a felting, where it's tamped into a non-woven material, which becomes the base of all of the Piñatex products, like a non-woven, but 100% natural one. That's completely grown and fully sustainable. And from there, you can finish it in 1,000 ways, just like you can finish leather. And so it's got all sorts of options within it for texture. It embosses incredibly well. They found ways using GOTS certified pigments to keep even the coloration sustainable. It's pretty durable stuff. It has natural water resistance, which of course leather doesn't. And again, it's really been adopted in lots of ways, not just in fashion. They have an entire upholstery division at Pinatex now. They're working with the auto industry as well, but also with H&M, Hugo Boss, people like that. So we're starting to see it break its way in. It's got a little bit of a way to go. There's some, decisions to be made along the way of how, what price fame, I think, is the age-old question, right? So because Pinatex starts as a base layer, because it's naturally grown and can be created organically, because the colorations they're using and the pigments are all got certified, you could make an argument, well, let's keep going down that clean green route. But the truth is Pinatex doesn't have to stay that way exclusively, because the base is so excellent. I could put other polymers on it. I could put laminates on top of it. I could do things that more readily compete with other textiles and the leather industry that still make it a better and healthier choice. And of course, a new and innovative choice, but forego some of the sustainability qualities that people
maybe compromise some of the values. I mean, I think Pinatex was one of the companies that was acknowledged earlier on, but I think it's exciting to see that they made it through in a way, because
yes,
there's always a risk. There's always a risk that you could stay at the experimental phase without, I mean, this relates to what we were saying before. I mean, you always have the risk that you won't make it through and will be able to scale it at an industry level and just remain with this marvelous idea almost for yourself and for history books. And I think it's very exciting when you see companies that are actually able to walk this path and take it in a way to the future.
Yeah, I'll tell you, back in 2015, when she won the Cartier Prize, Dr. Hyosa, I got nervous because I thought, oh no, she's going down a path where the whole world will celebrate her and she'll be gone in 24 months, because it happens all the time. We sort of celebrate our heroes and then they don't scale. But I think the viability of the product, the cost structure of what it is, will give it some strength. Still, with all of these innovative materials that we're talking about, I think all of them are still very much at risk. They all still need more funding. They all still need more support. Any one of them could have still gone away. It happened to Frumax with the Apple leather. They just couldn't make it through economically. But I do think, again, the silver lining of COVID, we're at this moment now of uptake where I think these companies are seeing a resurgence of interest, and it's creating an opportunity for them to continue to innovate and really capture a viable position in the marketplace.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Frank, in social media that I think relate very well to what we're saying about Pinatex. First of all, Dalil Miranda is asking if you believe some of these innovations are also motivated by the vegan activism in the fashion industry.
Definitely. I absolutely do. All of the sort of social change that's going on, and you could argue that it started in food. Once we knew we could eat cleaner, it created a market demand. I think that's actually been happening here. And again, not to sort of to dwell on the making positive out of a tragedy, but the numbers that I see in the data and the consumer data, the consumer behavior data now in just the last month versus 2019, because of the pandemic, attitudes have radically shifted around the world. We live in a different world than we lived in a year ago, and it's creating an acceptance. As I mentioned, host this group of CEOs, and we had the meeting with them Tuesday of last week. Yeah, just over a week ago. And I don't have to tell you, a group of the most powerful women and men in the world have fairly healthy egos, right? I mean, they're these very large, multi-billion-dollar companies, and they're all very cooperative, and they've been meeting for many years now, and we know each other well, so they're all, regular-ish in the meetings. But this last meeting was radically different. These were people changed. These were people desperate to move forward, desperate to accelerate. These are people who are recognizing we have to accelerate everything that we're doing. Still capitalists, still, have investors that they have to report to, but they recognize they have to move forward in a way that accepts evolution in the place of perfection. And so they're not fighting over the small differences that they have. They're really saying, okay, this is as good as it needs to be. Let's all get behind it and do it. And I think that's just a change in the zeitgeist of the culture. It's where we are now.
Yeah, and I think, now you have both economic and social catalysts that will push you to that will, I don't want to use the word force, but in a way that will force you into decisions like this. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And maybe in the same line, Melissa is also asking if you believe there's a possibility that in the future vegan materials will dominate the market.
Wow, that's a great question. I think they may have to. Let me explain my answer. I don't know that from a societal standpoint, we are, hunter-gatherer culture, right? We are evolved cavemen and women. I think people will eat less and less meat because I think, unfortunately, the way we raise and farm meat is damaging to the planet. And I think regulations on other issues like carbon and water will create a position where that's less and less viable, which will move us towards production of other things. I don't know that it's because society is going to wake up and make an ethical decision to do something differently. But I think we will be forced to. We have 2,700 days left before irreversible climate change. That's a little over 7 years. And we're not going to make it. I'm sorry to be the bearer of that news. And I don't mean that in 7 years the world is going to implode. Of course not. But we're going to cross a lot of boundaries that we're not able to come back from. And we will have to behave differently. And that's going to force a lot of the answer to that question.
Yeah, and maybe adding a little bit to your question, I think it's also important to consider that, to a question like this, I would say yes and no.
Yeah.
Because society is not all the same. The world is a very diverse place. And reality looks very different from one place to the other. And I think an important aspect always to consider in social phenomena or cultural phenomena is the fact that many of them collide and coexist at the same time. I think there's also going to be a sort of polarity to things like this, maybe with segments of the market that will be very demanding of initiatives like this, and maybe another side of the population that won't be nearly as involved in things like this. But even for non-vegan products, there's still the way to make better choices and to have better processes and to have better materials innovations, even if they're coming from animal sources.
That brings us to the next slide, actually.
Yeah, and actually we have a couple of questions in regards of leather, but I think we can ask them after you present this part.
And so here I just wanted to make the point that really you just made, Monica, that one of the alternatives to leather is leather, but doing it differently. We're at a point now where we're seeing a massive acceleration in the understanding of regenerative agriculture. And that is agriculture that moves beyond just sustaining into agriculture that actually regenerates the land. It's one of the things I also love about cactus leather. It actually sequesters carbon. It's a very good natural sequester of carbon. So now we're at a point where we've learned how to graze cattle differently, really the way we used to before we industrialized farming, and to cover those lands differently and to move the cattle around. And there are now 900 hubs around the world through the Savory Institute. And this particular one where this chart comes from, White Oak Pastures in Georgia, here in the US in the Southeast, they're now actually raising cattle. And of course, mostly they produce beef, but we're working with them to produce leather as well. Whereas conventional beef, you can see sort of off the charts and, 33% in terms of pounds of carbon per pound of beef. Pork, chicken, Beyond Burger, which we all know, sort of like the Impossible Burger, is the grown meat, but still producing carbon. They're now raising actual cattle, regular old beef, but in a way that creates a carbon negative position. And so they're actually putting more carbon into the ground by raising cattle than if they did nothing. And I think this is really just an advancement in the understanding of how to do things differently, not just do things in replacement of. And this is where I see our industry going. You're not just trying to figure out how to eliminate and cancel, but how to even do what we do in ways that are healthier. And again, super exciting. We're going to see regenerative agriculture, not just in the materials, the raw materials of our industry and accessories and fashion, but across the food chain, across so many of the things that we use that have to come out of the ground.
Yeah, agreed. And I lost my questions. Sorry about that, Frank. I'll need like 20 seconds to find them again. And
I'll just tell you, down at White Oak, they've started testing, and they have a nice little leather shack where they have an artisan using their materials and starting to actually produce product. And so what I'm working on now is how we can take these regenerative hubs and put their products into the supply stream. How do we get them into the tanneries so that we can start producing leather that's not only maybe bio-based in terms of its healthy tanning, but coming from a source that is regenerating the land. Imagine that, where we get to a place where we're producing actual leather without chrome, that's coming off of land, that's actually sequestering more carbon than it's using. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, actually, I think all of what you've explained in the last few minutes actually answers these questions. But I don't know if you want to add maybe something to it. Ana Carranco is asking, how can people that work in the animal leather industry compete or evolve with these type of materials? I guess referring to vegetable materials or plant-based materials.
So I think there's, we started to answer that a little bit in this last question. I would say these are some of the ways, finding ways to do it that are cleaner, that are greener, that are restorative and regenerative. Now we actually know how. We're at a point where this isn't a question that we're trying to answer. We've answered it. Now we just have to find ways to scale it so that the price can come down. I don't know. I don't think they're in Mexico just yet. They're mostly in the Pacific Northwest, but there's a small chain, about 60 stores. It's a burger shop, like a small version of a McDonald's or a Wendy's, slightly higher end, but still fast food, if you will. And they have regular burgers on the menu, but now they're offering this type of burger, and they're calling it their number 6 burger, because number 6 is carbon on the periodic table of elements. And it's because it's this carbon negative burger. And it's $8 versus the regular burger $6. So a little bit more, but of course customers are driving toward it in spades because they love this idea. So we just need scale. And I think eventually we'll ultimately convert. I'll never be able to answer the ethical issue. If you don't believe in killing animals, there's nothing I can do about that, of course. And that's a reasonable choice. That's an ethical choice. So, that's something that I don't know that will replace with beef, but then there are all these other innovations that maybe can replace that. And I think that's the option. But in terms of the damaging element of leather to the land and to the communities, I think we're at a point where we know the answer to that. We just have to get it scaled.
Yeah, and I think you've mentioned something incredibly important. I mean, I remember having this conversation with our footwear and leather goods design students, I mean, this is exactly what I said. I mean, there's also ethical choices, and there's nothing someone can do to convince you otherwise. So
Right.
if you're against any type of animal products, then there's another set of options you get to pick from. But then if from a reason or another you're okay with the usage of leather, let's say, there's always a better and a worse option.
Yes.
And I think this is also part of the conversation about the industry shifting and moving towards the best direction, as opposed to conforming and assuming that because we've done this like this for the past 200 years, this is the way that we should remain, right? So
Monica, I think about it. I mean, I'm old.
You're not old.
I remember being a kid in the 70s, and we would be riding on the highway in a car. And of course, airbags had not been invented, right? So I'm in the car. I'm 6 years old. I'm in the front seat of the car, no seatbelt. My father's probably doing, 75 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, because there wasn't a speed limit like we have now, smoking a cigarette. And
this sounds like the 70s for sure.
Does, exactly right. And when he was done with the cigarette, and my father was an honest and kind man. He was a scientist, worked on NASA, very good human being, but he would roll down the window and flick the cigarette out the window. Now today, the idea, one, that I would smoke, already a problem, that if I had smoked, I would flick my cigarette out and litter on the ground while my daughter was next to me in the front seat without a seatbelt. Think of how ridiculous that sounds, because we evolved, we learned, we had technology, we knew the difference, and we did better. And now you can't even imagine any of those things. And I think that's where we are now. 10 years from now, when you say, oh, I'm going to use a piece of leather that was created with hexavalent chromium that completely polluted the land in the community where I created the leather, or I could use that same piece of leather in a way that actually was beneficial, our children's children are going to be looking at us like, what the heck was wrong with you? Why? I don't even understand how you thought about it. And I think that's really where we are. It's just a matter of time before it seems revolting to behave the way we're behaving now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important factor to consider when having conversations like this. And it doesn't only relate to materials, but also to a lot of phenomena within culture.
Yes.
I mean, when you look back at certain things, it's not only about judging and criticizing, because there was a context that in a way made for those things to be acceptable.
Normalized.
Yeah, the thing you cannot do is assume 20 or 30 or 40 years later that things should always remain the same, because culture shifts. And in the same way, the ways that we behave and that we look at things become incredibly relevant. Yeah. So I think this topic is just like a perfect example of something like what you have just described. And
right now. Yes.
Maybe I'll ask another question before we move forward. Gabby is asking if you believe the entrance of sustainable materials will affect the fast fashion industry.
Yeah, I know for a fact that it already is. Through the work with Accenture, I work with Inditex and which is of course Zara and many other brands. I work with H&M. Nobody is working harder or spending more money in the fashion industry than these companies, because they know what's wrong with what they're doing, and they believe in creating a difference, and they're doing so much. Of course, I could argue they could all be doing more, but I would tell you that it's becoming a fundamental change in the way they behave, the considerations that they're making, the experiments that they're doing, the technology that they're investing in. And we need them to, because the truth is, as an industry, The worst thing to happen would be for H&M and Inditex to close. We would eliminate $30 billion from our industry. We would put 250,000 people out of work. I mean, people will literally starve to death if those companies close. Like, that is not what we want in the world. We don't want Bangladesh going out of business because we suddenly didn't want fast fashion. We just want fast fashion to be better and to create less impact. And they're working very, very hard. I'm impressed, genuinely impressed by the efforts that are going on in that industry. You know, I hope they can continue to invest at the level they are. I hope they can invest more. I hope consumers will continue to pressure them to behave better. All of those things matter, but it's absolutely changing. We will not recognize our own industry in 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, so I have two more questions from Marifer and Fernanda, but I think I can keep them for, I mean, I wouldn't say the end, but maybe after the next slide, because it relates, I think, to this.
Yes, so just two quick things here. This is really just about some changes that are going on now in recycled plastic. We refer to PET, which is mostly the plastic that we use as polyester, as water bottles. It's sort of the basic plastic polymer that controls the earth of business. What we're seeing now, of course, is things that we've had in the industry for a while. Nike Flyknit is completely made from recycled polyester. Patagonia has a large bag collection. We know with Adidas and the collaboration with Parley and the reduction in ocean plastics. Rothy's, the footwear, that's completely knit, all using recycled plastics. But what we're also experiencing right now in terms of innovation is the ability to actually break down these materials. And so not only do we have this recycled plastic being re-extruded and creating fiber, creating the circularity that we need, so none of these products go to landfill or back into the ocean, we're now coming into a point where we'll have the science to actually break down the plastic back into its core materials, and so that we will know how to dispose of it if we need to, if it degrades. We'll know how to get it out of the oceans and clean up the supply chain and the damage that the plastic has already done to the planet. So this innovation of being able to not only close the loop and create the circularity with innovations in plastic, and we're going to see that again in the next one, but that we know how to manage the waste even of this. It's still in experimental stages, but it's working functionally. We just need to find a little bit more investment for it to scale. But again, the idea 5 to 6 years from now, everyone will know that plastic is never going to end up in landfill. Even if it doesn't get recycled or upcycled into something else, it'll just get broken down by these new series of enzymes and microbes that are actually eating it and digesting it back into its original form.
Yeah, I mean, I think this last bit is incredibly important. I think there is a huge gap by the end of the chain, let's say, yes. Because as much as you create more responsible materials, there's also that has to be done at the consumer level in regards of discarding products or discarding garments or accessories or whatnot, because there's always a dilemma in that regard. I mean, I you know Mexico very well. I can tell you there's no way to discard fashion items at a consumer level in the country. There is no containers. There is no one receiving items like this.
There's no infrastructure. Yeah.
And as one of our alums, she's always saying, by the time you accept, you already gave away things, you donated, you did this, you did that, then the only option you have left is to hold your breath and put it in the trash.
Yes.
And that's always
doesn't feel good. Yeah.
I think it's a difficult choice. So, points like the one you mentioned, I think are also incredibly important to close the loop.
I remember seeing a film years ago, a short film, and it was basically about people in the future, and they were young students, and they came back into this time, and they were on a blackboard with an equation on it, and the equation was modern day society trying to figure out how to manage nuclear waste, because nuclear power made sense, but the waste, of course, didn't. And this 12-year-old student walked up to the board, and like wrote it out and basically solved the problem of nuclear waste, because it was an equation that any fifth grader knew in the future, because we had resolved the technology. And again, same to the earlier question, I just think that's where we'll be. We'll figure out with science how to manage these issues.
Okay, and I think maybe before this last bit, I'll ask you a couple of questions that are somehow related. Marifer was asking before if these productions and materials can only be produced artisanally, or if they can be done faster. But I would also add to this question, how many of them are artisanal processes and how many of them are also industrially produced materials? I mean, I know maybe there's no number that we can say for one or the other, but I think it's maybe good to explain how do you split something like this.
Yeah, so of the three materials that we spoke of, the good news is that all of them are industrially scalable. They're not currently industrially scaled. So they're still produced more than at an artisan level. They're in low level production. You could buy nearly as much as you needed unless you were a very large supplier. But they're the industry around them hasn't been supported to extend it past those key producers. So if I decide tomorrow to open a leather tannery, I can access all the equipment and the chemicals and the supply chain that I need as a new person. That's not the case with Mycium. That's not the case with Piñatex. That's not the case with Deserto. So the externalizing beyond the original makers hasn't really happened yet. But as technologies, there's nothing to prevent them from going beyond the artisan stage into full scalability at an industrial level. The way they're made is fully industrializable, and that's very exciting about the future.
Yeah, and this also relates to what we were mentioning about, I mean, I can't even remember now, but like 20 minutes ago, talking about the need of companies like these being supported in order to become competitive at the industries and to actually become viable options and substitutes to other materials that are commonly used, that you could find absolutely everywhere. Because I think this also applies, let's say, to derivatives from oil.
Yep.
Because we've talked about leather, but there's all of those other options that are leather replacements, but that are basically petroleum.
Yep.
And highly pollutant. And then you also have to ask yourself questions about that. And I think for these other alternatives that you're presenting to become actual options, there are a lot of things that need to happen.
Yes. And as an industry, we just have to begin supporting them. But we really are. It's just starting, but it's happening.
No, I agree. I fully agree with you. I mean, I don't think this is yet commonly spread conversation about amongst consumers or amongst normal people.
Right.
And I think there's still a lot of information that needs to be put out there in the world so that people have also a better understanding of what they're buying into, basically. So, and I also want to ask you another question. How do these materials relate? I mean, I'm not asking exactly the question, but how do the previous materials relate to its pollutants at the production stage? Because let's say we could talk about natural fibers or discarded materials that get transformed into another thing or whatnot, but there's always chemicals or dyes or other things involved in the process. So how do they relate to aspects like that?
Yes. So the beautiful thing about both Mycium and Deserto is they are really clean prospects, and their raw materials themselves, of course, are completely natural. So there's nothing funky happening there. And in terms of their processing, there are really no inorganic solvents necessarily being used. Piñatex, it depends on which way you go with it. So with Piñatex, I can keep it clean if I want to, or I could put a metallic layer over it and of sustainability. But there are ways to go left a little bit with some of those materials, and I suspect that will be the way all of these materials evolve. I can choose to stay the path, or I can deviate a little bit. Yeah. I can buy the food that's non-GMO but not organic, or I could buy the food that's both non-GMO and organic. It'll be my choice as a consumer.
Absolutely. And I think we still have some time, but we're almost running out of it. So maybe we can continue with our last slides, and then we can resume with the final questions by the end of the conversation.
Perfect. So this last video I wanted to show you, it's a product from Adidas called the Futurecraft 3D and now even 4D. Because while many of us are aware of and have maybe even personally experienced 3D printing in one way or the other, we're getting to a point where the latest input into innovative materials in the accessories and fashion industry in general is not a material, but data. This idea that we're able to really use data at much deeper levels, that we have a greater understanding of data sets and how to apply them to people, to physiology, to social constructs, to look at data in ways that help us design and create utility within design and manufacturing facility in design. This sort of data-oriented, data-driven approach that is actually changing not just 3D printing, but I think changing the way we'll ultimately end up creating many of the products. And probably easiest if we just play this very short video, and then we could talk about it some more.
Absolutely. Okay, it will be here any second, I think.
No problem. What you'll see in this video is data changing the way we actually extrude and print and build around this new type of product.
Can data help us break the limits of existing footwear? Can it help us make more using way less?
When we create with data, we can create more in tune with the athlete. With Strung, for the first time, we can program single threads in any direction, where each thread has a different property or strength. Together, they form this seamless network of really precise performance zones. Every single thread is serving a purpose.
This shoe is for your really fast runner, your 5.5 minute mile pace runner. We saw an opportunity to hyper optimize the solution for fast runners, and we just took it to the extreme.
We're using the athlete intelligence engine to capture data in a 360-degree view to the athletes. Performance data, movement data, speed and endurance, but then there's also more human side to the data.
We're mixing the hard science with the soft science, and it's leading to a lot more. We're learning about how the athlete lives, what drives them, their habits, their behaviors, their hopes and dreams, using only what is necessary, nothing more.
So what I love about what this technology is showing us is that it's not just the hard data around how to physically form to the foot or how to maximize the speed, but this idea of the socio-emotional inputs of what feels right for the runner. What is it about the rest of their day that influences their run? What is it about particular pressures in certain areas of this person versus that person? And it starts to let us understand that all of these different data sets, not just the quantitative data sets, but the qualitative data sets will have a place, because now we're starting to be able to translate them into our design and actual manufacturing. And so the idea that, if I buy a jacket and then I go to my tailor because he knows me and he knows my body, and already I know that when I'm done, the jacket's going to fit me the way I want it to fit me. That's already an experience. If I go to a custom tailor, he builds the jacket that way from the start, right? And so imagine now that instead of changing or having this long process of customization that's not available to enough people because it's expensive, now I could get to a point where I could create those implementations, but also continually improve them. Imagine if you knew as you bought a pair of shoes or bought a particular jacket or a shirt, that the next time you buy it, you're going to make it slightly differently. Next time I want the sleeve a quarter of an inch longer, or the shoulder a half an inch higher, or the medium base, actually I need a medium +1, and that you'll be able to physically control the inputs. Or I love the design, but that texture feels weird on my body. Imagine now the difference in the experience of innovation, where you'll have the opportunity to control those inputs as a consumer, because we've already moved 3D to a point where we can create at scale, but now I'll be able to put in a whole different set of data considerations that really personalize the product. And we're there. It's not at scale, but we're there, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I have a question for you in this regard, because I mean, it's not a feeling. I know that the performance and the sports industry is way ahead of fashion.
Way ahead.
I mean, there is innovation everywhere. You know, the example that you've just shown, I mean, it's just clear in the way that they're working with different sets of things in order to create something that looks like a sneaker, but has a completely different process behind it. And I think I like to call it the performance industry is very good and has been very good in recent years or in the past decades at doing this. But I don't think fashion is nearly as close as being here. But I would like to know from your end if you know maybe of some brands that are excelling in a way at doing things like this.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like so many things, I think it's going to happen at the extremes, right? Because in a way, it already happens in haute couture. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's very rarefied. There's 2,000 customers in the whole world.
And crazy expensive.
Crazy expensive. But I worked a lot of years for Mr. Lagerfeld in the Atelier. As a customer, you left with perfection in a garment. And I don't mean perfection creatively or aesthetically, but perfection for you. The fact that your waist was a little higher, or that you only liked cotton, not silk, or that the beading at the top line was irritating, so we would change the bead and change the beading pattern, but nobody else sort of saw the visual change in the dress. That's haute couture. So it already happons at that level.
It's a literal perfection.
It's a literal perfection, exactly.
For 150K.
Exactly. For the price of a home, you can have a dress. At the other side, what I'm starting to see is innovation in mass scale. I see innovation even in places like Inditex at Zara.
I was going to say that because of the systems and the infrastructure that they have built.
Exactly. They're so large, and they're investing in elements that will allow them to bring that technology at scale. And first, we'll see it in consumer experience. You'll see it in the dressing rooms as they're trying on product. You'll be able to, have different experiences. You'll be able to see the factory. You'll be able to see the field where the cotton was grown if you want to. All of those innovations will happen at scale there, and eventually increase in the level of interactivity between the customer.
Okay. Someone is mentioning Uniqlo. Do you feel that way also about what they do?
Uniqlo is fascinating to me. What I don't know that they're focused so much on that experience. They are very innovative, but I think that's where they're looking at things. They're looking at advancing the science of clothing. They spend a lot of time and resources on innovating functionality into products that are the best versions of what they are. But they're not a fancy company. They're not about radically transforming new ideas. They're about tweaking and perfecting the basics in our fashion space.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, I'm not sure that this is the case in 2020, but I know that in the past they have been very insistent in working closely with their vendors at material development. But I think when we're talking about companies like Inditex, you're talking about innovation in all different aspects that are related to creating and producing fashion garments, or however you want to call it. I mean, it's not only about the material, but the way that data is used, the way that systems are implemented,
Yes.
the way they trace their products, whatnot. I mean, we could spend another 3 hours talking specifically about this.
We really could.
But maybe to round the idea, it's maybe all of the companies that are not in this extreme or the other that are probably going to struggle, do you think, at bringing a lot of these ideas and concepts and systems within their company space?
Yeah, listen, I think creativity will always have a home, but I think it will become harder and harder to be in the middle, unfortunately, because you lack either the price point or the scale to bring the economies to that scale. I think that's going to be a challenging space. And I also think, we're at a point where, part of the data evolution is an evolution in manufacturing. And so the truth is we're going to put a lot of people out of work over the next 10 years as we begin to automate more and more. And I think it's that center space where we're largely going to affect that. So really some very broad scale changes happening in our industry over the next decade.
Well, thank you, Frank. I think we ran out of time. Maybe. I mean, I know for a fact that we could spend literally 2, 3, 4 full days discussing topics like this. But maybe before we leave, just to ask you a couple of recommendations in regards of this could be books, magazines, documentaries, whatever you feel could feed and enhance the knowledge of the audience that is having a look at our conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I would say there's a couple of maybe a top 3 for me right now. What I would say is look at and study the life, if you will, of Elsa Schiaparelli. And that's obviously in the days of analog. She's long gone, but her approach to fashion was artistic and scientific. And it, in a way, as old as it is, it seems to me a good proxy for some of the things that are transforming our industry today. And there's a couple of biopics and a whole bunch of books, but do some homework on Schiaparelli. She's fascinating. The other thing that I would say is I know we spend so much of our time in fashion reading the consumer publications like, Vogue and Marie Claire and Harper's Bazaar. And some of us, will read WWD and Business of Fashion. And of course, I encourage you to read them. But start reading Sourcing Journal.
I agree.
Start reading some of the one level down trades that are really talking about the issues that are fundamentally affecting and changing our industry. Everything from the issues, from the challenges in China with the Uyghur community and slavery, to the data elements that are transforming the industry. So Sourcing Journal is a big one for me. And then I think the third thing that I would sort of take a look at a resource is a personal journey. For a period of time. You could do it for 1 day, you could do it for a week, you could do it for a month. We all take these like challenges, all these memes on social media. For whatever period you can commit to, whether you eat it or buy it or live it, very purposely try to do it cleaner and record how easy or difficult it is with your existing way of life. So don't go to a sustainable brand. Don't go to a wholly organic market. Try to live your life in your regular world and make some notations about whether it's easy or hard. And where it's hard, say something, because these brands and companies are here to serve us. And I think the more people that talk about how to do it better, how to do it more innovatively, as consumers, we have a whole lot of power. So I tried a few months back, I tried the $2 challenge. I tried to live on $2 for the day, and it was a factual impossibility. Absolutely impossible. But it gave me an awareness, of course, of what nearly a third of the world has to face every day.
Absolutely. And I also, I mean, I think asking ourselves questions and testing ourselves is definitely not the only solution, but it's an important part to the equation.
Yes.
Because there's a fragment of everyone, industry, consumers, governments, at making better choices and at making this work in ways that are a lot better, a lot more empathic, a lot more respectful. Yeah. And I think we're definitely an important part of the equation. Yes. So thank you so much, Frank. I can't thank you enough for doing this. And
yeah, thank you. I was just going to say thank you, both of you, for this great conversation. Sorry, Monica.
No, I was going to thank you for bearing with me because I feel my English today has been an absolute disaster. I can't think straight.
Not at all. No. As usual, please.
Thank you.
And I'm very excited about a lot of the questions. I think, and I think really, what not only the examples you gave, like your experience in the industry or living it, and Monica also seeing like the education side of it. So I think that's an always excellent combination. If people didn't register for the event, but they want to receive a follow-up email with all of Frank's recommendations, with a lot of like a short video, like for everything that we're continue to do with the content. You can obviously see this in YouTube, but please leave your email in any of the comments and we will send you a follow-up email with a lot of information. Frank, also we have a whole article on Frank on our blog because of his last visit, so you can read more about what he does. Please follow us on social media, and thank you both. Please join us on next boards, and Frank, I hope we can see you here again whenever this is possible.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Gonzalo. Monica, always a pleasure. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Frank. Have a great day. Well, evening now.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Gracias.